In this story we are introduced to Elara, a man who leads a double life as a janitor and a brilliant, self-taught scholar. Ostracized by his community due to his quiet personality, skin color, and refusal to engage in political debates, Elara finds solace in studying ancient texts. His life takes a dramatic turn at a prestigious gala when he steps out of the shadows to translate a historical text that a renowned historian, Dr. Alastair Finch, is unable to read without his notes. Elara's impromptu display of knowledge captivates the audience and shatters their assumptions, leading to life-changing opportunities that force him to reconcile his past with his new future. If you liked the video and subscribe to the channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. The polished marble floors of the Grand Athenaeum reflected the gilded chandeliers above, casting a warm, deceptive glow on the cold, cavernous space. For Elara, the light was just another surface to be buffed, a shimmering obstacle between him and the end of his shift. He moved with a practiced, silent efficiency, his mop a metronome keeping time with the lonely rhythm of his life. He was a ghost in this palace of wealth and influence, invisible to the patrons, and even more so to the people who looked like him. Ostracized. The word was a heavy stone in his pocket, a constant weight he carried. It was a brand seared onto his soul by the very community he was born into. They saw him not as a man but as a betrayal, a traitor. His crime was one of omission, a refusal to engage in the heated, often vitriolic discussions that defined their social circles. He didn't march, he didn't protest, he didn't post impassioned screeds online. His silence, in their eyes, was a form of complicity. He was a living embodiment of what they feared most: indifference. He had a different kind of fire burning inside, a quiet, scholarly flame that they mistook for a lack of passion. He spoke in hushed tones about ancient empires, about forgotten scripts, about the wisdom of ages past. They spoke of the urgent, of the now, of the injustices that burned hot and bright. The two worlds were irreconcilable, and he had been exiled from one for daring to exist in the other. His life was a stark dichotomy. By day he was Elara, the janitor, the silent figure who cleaned up after the world's elite. By night he was Elara, the scholar, poring over fragile ancient texts he accessed through a network of university libraries and digital archives. His apartment was a fortress of knowledge, its walls lined with books in languages few could read, its tables cluttered with magnifying glasses, faded scrolls, and meticulous translations. He could read Akkadian cuneiform as easily as he could read English, and his knowledge of hieroglyphics and ancient Greek was not just academic, but a living, breathing language he carried in his heart. This was his true passion, the one that had cost him everything. Tonight, the Athenaeum was hosting its most prestigious event of the year, the annual Innovators Gala. It was a gathering of tech titans, financial moguls, and cultural heavyweights, the kind of people who moved markets and shaped global narratives with a single sentence. The air hummed with a palpable energy of power and privilege. Elara, pushing his cleaning cart past a group of men in bespoke suits, felt the familiar pang of his dual existence. He was so close to this world, yet a universe away. He had been assigned to the main hall, a vast circular room where the keynote speech was to be held. The stage was set with a minimalist elegance, a single podium bathed in a brilliant spotlight. He was to do a final sweep before the doors opened to the guests. As he moved along the periphery, his eyes, trained to find hidden details, fell upon a small, unassuming table tucked behind a velvet curtain near the stage. On it, under a protective glass case, lay a display that made his breath catch in his throat. It was a scroll. But not just any scroll. It was a fragment of the Rosetta Stone, or at least, a highly convincing facsimile. The three distinct scripts, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, Demotic script, and ancient Greek, were meticulously recreated. It was a testament to the past, a silent story waiting to be told. Elara felt an almost magnetic pull towards it. He knew the text, he had studied it for years, the subtle nuances of its translation, the historical context that gave it life. He felt an intense, quiet surge of emotion, a feeling that he hadn't allowed himself in a long time. It was the thrill of connection, of shared history. The speaker for the evening was a renowned historian, Dr. Alastair Finch. A man known for his dramatic flair and his ability to make history feel alive. Elara had seen his broadcasts and read his books. He was a showman. But as he watched Dr. Finch do his final sound check, Elara noticed a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. He saw the historian's hand tremble slightly as he adjusted his notes. It was a small, almost imperceptible detail, but Elara's life had been built on noticing the unnoticed. The doors opened and the hall filled with a torrent of voices and the clinking of glasses. The air grew thick with perfume, cologne, and the low thrum of conversation. Elara, having finished his task, retreated to his usual post in a small alcove near the service entrance, a shadow in the corner. From there he could observe without being seen. He watched as the sea of people parted for Dr. Finch to take the stage. The speech began. It was a masterpiece of rhetoric, an impassioned plea for the preservation of history. Dr. Finch spoke of the importance of the Rosetta Stone, of the mysteries it had unlocked. He spoke of its 3 scripts as a key to a lost world, a language that had been silent for millennia. But then he faltered. He held up a copy of the scroll, a page from his notes, and a look of confusion crossed his face. He leaned into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice a little strained, "it seems I have misplaced my translation notes. A rather embarrassing oversight." A nervous ripple went through the crowd. Dr. Finch, usually so composed, looked flustered. "I can of course speak to the general context," he said, trying to regain his footing, "but to read the actual texts, I'm afraid that is beyond my capacity without my notes." He chuckled weakly, but the tension in the room was palpable. A profound silence fell over the hall. It was a moment of theatrical failure, a grand pause in an otherwise perfect performance. From his alcove, Elara felt a different kind of tension. He knew the translation by heart. He could recite the entire text, every word, every nuance, every historical footnote. He saw the scroll on the table, the one he had just stared at with such reverence. He saw the great Dr. Finch, a celebrated historian, standing before the world's most influential people, utterly exposed. It was a moment that could define a man. The janitor, ostracized and invisible, saw an opportunity not for glory, but for a connection to the very thing that had made him an outcast. He took a deep breath, and for the first time in years he walked out of the shadows and into the light. A hush fell over the room as a figure emerged from the shadows. The low hum of a cleaning cart's wheels against the marble floor was the only sound, a stark, jarring intrusion on the gala's polished veneer. A wave of confusion rippled through the audience. Faces, accustomed to seeing only what they expected to see, stared in disbelief. Was this part of the show? A strange bit of performance art? Dr. Alastair Finch, his face a mask of mortification, looked out at the man in a simple janitor's uniform, a man he had not even seen arrive. Elara felt the weight of every stare, the invisible pressure of 1,000 skeptical eyes. He walked with a determined, though not defiant, pace, his gaze fixed on Dr. Finch. His hands, calloused from work, were steady. He wasn't thinking of the stares or the potential embarrassment or the scorn he might receive. He was thinking of the history, of the words waiting to be spoken. The silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by the soft scrape of his work shoes on the floor. "Excuse me," Elara said, his voice quiet but clear, carrying through the microphone that Dr. Finch had left on the podium. It was a voice that held no pretense, no performance. It was simply the voice of a man with something to say. Dr. Finch, taken aback, finally spoke. I beg your pardon, sir. There appears to be a misunderstanding. This is a private event." "I am aware," Elara responded, approaching the podium. He didn't look at the crowd, only at the esteemed historian. "Your notes. You have misplaced your translation notes for the Rosetta Stone fragment." The statement, so matter-of-fact, seemed to confuse Finch even more. He nodded slowly, his brows furrowed. "Yes, it's a rather unfortunate incident. I'm afraid I cannot proceed with the full reading." "You don't have to," Elara said, finally looking out at the sea of faces. "I can." The crowd murmured. A few people scoffed, and a woman in the front row let out a small, disbelieving laugh. A janitor? Translate a Coptic hieroglyph? It was absurd. It was an affront to their intelligence, a bizarre break in a carefully curated evening. A flicker of anger crossed Dr. Finch's face. "Sir, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is a highly complex historical text. It's not something you can simply memorize." "No," Elara agreed. "You must understand it. Its context, its grammar, its structure." "I have." Before Dr. Finch could protest further, Elara took a step towards the display table. He looked down at the facsimile of the Rosetta Stone, his eyes tracing the familiar lines of the script. He closed his eyes for a brief second, allowing the ancient words to flow through his mind, as natural to him as breathing. He looked back at the crowd, and for the first time, a small, genuine smile touched his lips. The text is a decree from the General Council of Priests, assembled in Memphis, honoring the new pharaoh Ptolemy V. He began, his voice no longer just clear but resonant. He gestured to the top section of the scroll. The hieroglyphs, the sacred script, read thus: In the time of Ptolemy, the son of Ptolemy and Arsinoe, the gods, and in the 19th year of his rule. It goes on to detail the various honors bestowed upon him. They are extensive. His voice was hypnotic, a captivating river of knowledge. He spoke with the effortless grace of someone who lived and breathed this language. He then shifted his focus to the center section. The demotic script, the script of the people, follows the same decree. It serves as a simplification, a more accessible version for daily life. It is less ceremonial but no less profound. He began to read, his words a rhythmic cascade of sounds that held the audience spellbound. He didn't just read, he interpreted, adding footnotes and historical context as he went, explaining why a particular phrase was used, or what it signified about the political climate of the time. The crowd was no longer murmuring. They were silent, leaning forward in their chairs. The scoffing woman now had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with astonishment. Dr. Finch, who had been about to step in and stop this bizarre display, had frozen. He was listening, truly listening, and a look of dawning comprehension, then awe, spread across his face. He recognized the depth of the knowledge in Elara's voice, the authentic passion that he himself had only ever performed. This was not a janitor memorizing a paragraph. This was a scholar revealing a forgotten world. Finally, Elara's gaze settled on the bottom section, the ancient Greek script. And here, in the language that has bridged so many of our modern thoughts with the ancient world, is the same message. It's a linguistic key, a testament to a world that was both vast and interconnected. He read the Greek with an accent that was both academic and deeply felt, the words sounding like music. He finished the translation and looked up, a faint flush on his cheeks from the energy of the moment. He had not performed for them. He had simply shared what he knew. A profound, stunned silence hung in the air for a full 10 seconds. Then, a single person in the back of the room, a young tech mogul, began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate clap, a lone sound in a quiet room. Then another joined, and another, until the entire hall erupted in a thunderous applause. The sound was not just for the performance, it was for the audacity, the brilliance, the unexpectedness of it all. It was the sound of 1,000 assumptions being shattered. Dr. Finch, looking at Elara with a profound sense of humility, stepped back from the podium. He took the microphone and held it out to him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am not the scholar you came to see tonight. He is." He gestured to Elara. "We have just witnessed an incredible display of knowledge, of passion, and of what it truly means to be a custodian of history." He looked at Elara, his eyes shining. "Thank you." The crowd's applause intensified. Elara stood there holding the microphone, the spotlight burning bright. The world he had spent his life in, the world of shadows and silent work, was gone. In its place, a new world was opening, a world that was looking at him not with scorn but with admiration. He had walked out of the darkness and the world had looked back. The applause was a tidal wave, washing over Elara and the meticulously curated space of the Grand Athenaeum. It was no longer a polite, performative clapping. It was a genuine, thunderous roar of appreciation, a sound Elara had never heard directed at himself. He stood under the brilliant spotlight, a figure of humble cloth and immense gravitas, the microphone still warm in his hand. The contrast was stark. The glittering millionaires in their custom-tailored suits and elegant gowns were now giving a standing ovation to a man whose daily task was to empty their wastebaskets. Dr. Alastair Finch, his initial shock giving way to genuine admiration, was the first to act. He approached Elara, placed a hand on his shoulder, and spoke into the microphone. "I believe we owe this man not just our thanks, but our sincerest apologies. For years, I have lectured on the importance of preserving history. Tonight, this man, with nothing but the truth in his heart and the knowledge in his mind, has shown us what it truly means to be a guardian of the past. Dr. Finch's voice was filled with a humble reverence that was entirely new to the audience. He then turned to Elara, a wide, genuine smile on his face. "Elara," he said, "I do not know your last name, but I know this. You are one of the finest scholars I have ever had the privilege to meet." The words acted as a signal. A cascade of people began to move toward the stage, their faces alight with a mixture of curiosity, awe, and a certain kind of professional hunger. At the front of the pack was a man Elara recognized from countless magazine covers. Adrian Thorne, the founder of the global tech giant, Thorne Industries. He was a man famous for his ability to spot unrecognized genius and turn it into gold. "That was extraordinary," Thorne said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He wasn't looking at Elara as a janitor anymore. He was looking at him as a project, a puzzle, a solution. The way you connected the scripts, the historical context, it was more than a translation. It was a live excavation. He gestured to the crowd, now swelling around the stage. "I am launching a new foundation, a digital archive to preserve and digitize ancient texts. We have the technology, but we lack the soul. We lack the true custodians. I believe we just found ours." Before Elara could even process the words, a woman in a sweeping emerald dress stepped forward. She was Vivian Kincaid, the head of the Kincaid Foundation, a philanthropic organization dedicated to cultural preservation. "Mr. Elara," she said, her voice smooth and melodic, "my foundation has been struggling with a similar problem. We fund expeditions, we acquire artifacts, but the true work of understanding them often takes a backseat to the logistics. We could use someone with your deep knowledge and passion. The position is not one of a janitor, but of a director, an archivist, a guide." As more people pressed in, offering business cards and heartfelt praise, Elara felt a profound disassociation. This was not his world. The names, the titles, the wealth, it was all a foreign language to him. He was used to being ignored, to being invisible. The warmth of the spotlight felt alien, and the support was almost overwhelming. He felt a deep, almost painful irony in the contrast. For so long, the people who looked like him had cast him aside, seeing his love for the past as a betrayal of the present. They had seen his silence as a weakness, his scholarship as a form of escapism. Yet here, in this room of the privileged, the very thing that had made him an outcast was now being celebrated as his greatest strength. He caught a glimpse of a familiar face in the crowd, a man from his neighborhood, a leader in his community. The man's eyes were wide, a complex mix of disbelief, regret, and something that looked like dawning pride. It was a fleeting, silent exchange, but it spoke volumes. The scorn and suspicion Elara had lived with for years were, in that moment, being confronted by a new, undeniable reality. The man who had been ostracized was now the centerpiece of a global conversation. Dr. Finch, seeing Elara's overwhelmed expression, took control. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe our new friend needs a moment. I will be hosting an intimate gathering tomorrow evening with Adrian Thorne and Vivian Kincaid to discuss this further. I encourage you all to attend." He then led Elara gently off the stage and into a quiet waiting room backstage. The room was a sanctuary, a small pocket of silence away from the roaring crowd. Elara sat down, his mind reeling. Dr. Finch handed him a glass of water. "Breathe," he said, his voice kind. "This is a lot to take in." I just wanted to help," Elara said, his voice still a little hoarse from his impromptu speech. "I saw you were in trouble." Dr. Finch chuckled. "You did more than help, my friend. You saved me from a career-defining disaster, and in doing so, you have defined your own career. You have found your stage, Elara. The world is listening." As he left the Athenaeum a short while later, Elara felt the cool night air on his face. He wasn't carrying his cleaning cart. An assistant had already taken it away. He was holding a stack of business cards, each one a promise of a new future. He walked past the grand entrance, no longer a ghost moving through the shadows, but a man walking towards a new dawn. The echoes of scorn that had followed him for so long had been drowned out by the sound of 1,000 people clapping. This chapter expands on the immediate aftermath of Elara's reveal, introducing the key players who will help him transition from janitor to scholar. The focus on the reactions of Adrian Thorne and Vivian Kincaid gives a tangible sense of the opportunities now available to him, while the brief glimpse of his former community leader hints at the emotional complexities of his new situation. I've left it open-ended to allow us to explore different avenues in the next chapter. Would you like to focus on Elara's new job and his first steps into the world of academia, or would you prefer to dive deeper into the reaction of his community and how they now treat him? The morning after the gala dawned on a world that felt both entirely new and unsettlingly familiar. Elara woke in his small apartment, the walls still lined with the books and scrolls that had been his only companions for years. The memory of the previous night felt like a dream, the thunderous applause, the earnest offers, the brilliant lights. But the stack of embossed business cards on his nightstand, along with a text message from a newly acquired number, served as concrete proof. It was Dr. Finch, confirming their meeting that afternoon. Elara ran a hand over his face, the stubble a small comfort in a reality that felt surreal. His mop and bucket were gone, replaced by a promise of a future he had only dared to imagine in the quiet solitude of his study. The meeting was held not in a sterile boardroom, but in a private study at a historic brownstone owned by Vivian Kincaid. The room smelled of old leather and fine whiskey, its walls adorned with maps of ancient trade routes and framed fragments of unearthed pottery. Dr. Finch was there, looking far more relaxed and avuncular than he had on stage. Adrian Thorne sat in a large armchair, his posture radiating a restless energy, a mind always a few steps ahead. Vivian Kincaid, the epitome of grace, gestured for Elara to sit, her smile warm and genuine. "Elara," Thorne began, not with an introduction, but with a directness that was his hallmark. "What you did last night, it wasn't just a translation. It was a demonstration of a different kind of intelligence. We're all here because we see a future where that intelligence is not just respected, but foundational." He leaned forward, placing a sleek tablet on the mahogany table. "My foundation, the one I mentioned, is about creating a digital Rosetta Stone. An accessible, interconnected global archive of historical texts. We have the technology, the funding, and the servers. What we need is an architect. Someone who can understand the linguistic bridges, the cultural nuances, the very heart of these lost worlds. We need a director of cultural linguistics. The role is yours should you want it." Vivian Kincaid spoke next, her voice a calm counterpoint to Thorne's intensity. "And my foundation, Elara, focuses on the physical. The artifacts themselves. We have teams in the field, in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in the farthest reaches of the Silk Road. We're uncovering new texts every day, and they sit in archives waiting for someone to give them a voice. Adrian's vision is to digitize and share. My vision is to unearth and protect. We see a path where our two visions can converge. We would like for you to lead this joint effort. You would be the bridge, Elara. The scholar who breathes life into the artifacts Thorne's technology will preserve." Elara sat in stunned silence, his mind racing. The offers were not just jobs. They were two sides of the same coin, each offering a world of possibilities. Thorne's offer was for the digital, the global, a new frontier of historical study. Kincaid's was for the physical, the tangible, a chance to work with the very objects he had spent his life studying from afar. He looked from one face to the next, seeing not the arrogant power he had expected, but a genuine respect for his knowledge. This was not a charity case. They were offering him a role they believed he was uniquely qualified to fill. "With all due respect," Elara began, his voice still a little shaky, I was a janitor. My experience is in cleaning, not in managing multi-million-dollar projects." Dr. Finch laughed gently. "Your experience is in being a true scholar, Elara. The rest is just paperwork. You'll find that when you are the world expert on a subject, the world tends to adapt to you, not the other way around." Elara took a deep breath, a quiet resolve settling over him. He knew what he had to do. "I would be honored to accept this role," he said, the words feeling both foreign and profoundly right. "I believe the two visions are not just compatible but essential. To work on the front lines of history, both in the field and in the digital world, it's what I have always dreamed of." The rest of the meeting was a blur of details, contracts, and handshakes. When Elara finally stepped out of the brownstone, the sun was low in the sky, and the streetlights were beginning to flicker on. He was no longer a janitor, no longer a ghost. He was a partner, a director, an architect of a new historical age. The feeling was intoxicating, and for a moment he felt a soaring sense of triumph. But as he walked down the street, a familiar voice called out his name. "Elara." "Wait up." It was the man from the gala, the community leader he had seen in the crowd. His name was Samuel. He was a big man with a commanding presence, a man who had often spoken passionately about the need for community solidarity. He had, on more than one occasion, publicly criticized Elara for his perceived indifference. "I just wanted to congratulate you," Samuel said, his voice hesitant, his eyes unable to meet Elara's. "I saw what you did last night. It was incredible." The words felt hollow, a forced apology dressed in praise. Elara said nothing, simply waiting. We didn't know," Samuel continued, finally looking at him, a deep regret etched on his face. "We didn't know about this side of you. We saw you as someone who didn't care, who had turned his back." "I never turned my back," Elara said quietly, his voice without anger or accusation. "I simply had my own way of moving forward. My own way of honoring the past." Samuel nodded, a profound sadness in his eyes. "We see that now. We were wrong. We ostracized you for a silence that was really a deep, quiet strength." He extended a hand. "The community, we'd like to make this right. We'd like to support you." Elara looked at the hand, then at Samuel's face, seeing the regret, the humility, and the dawning understanding. He had found acceptance in the most unexpected of places, and now, it was coming from the very people who had once denied it to him. He shook Samuel's hand, the gesture a silent acknowledgement of the new chapter that had just begun, not just in his career but in his personal life as well. The weight of this new dawn was not just the weight of his new responsibility, but the weight of a painful history that was finally starting to heal. Elara's first official day began not with the clatter of a cleaning cart, but with the silent glide of a glass elevator. He ascended to the top floor of the Thorn Industries skyscraper, a monolith of steel and glass that pierced the city skyline. The office was a masterpiece of minimalist design, a world away from the dusty solitude of his apartment. His new office, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows, offered a panoramic view of the city, a world he had once cleaned from the ground up. On his new desk, a sleek terminal was already logged in, its screen displaying an intricate color-coded map of ancient trade routes. The irony was not lost on him. The very world that had once dismissed him was now trusting him with its history. His first meeting as the Director of Cultural Linguistics was a working session with Adrian Thorne and Vivian Kincaid. They were a study in contrast. Thorne, in a simple gray polo, moved with the energy of a man who saw the world as a problem to be solved with code and data. Kincaid, in a tailored suit, was the quiet force of history, her movements deliberate, her eyes holding the patience of 1,000 generations. They treated him not as a protege but as a peer. "Elara," Thorne began, his voice devoid of any pretense, "Vivian has a new acquisition from a dig site in the Levant. It's a collection of clay tablets. They're in rough condition. The carbon dating suggests they're from the Assyrian Empire, but the inscriptions are fragmented and appear to be in a dialect we haven't seen before. We need you to take the lead on the translation and contextualization. Vivian's team has provided high-resolution scans for you to work with." Kincaid nodded, pulling a folder from her briefcase. "The Assyrian Empire had a complex system of cuneiform, as you know. The challenge here is twofold: the physical deterioration of the tablets and the linguistic anomalies. Our best guess is that these are administrative records from a remote outpost, possibly a garrison. But without an expert eye, they are just beautiful, useless clay." Elara's heart quickened. This was the work he had dreamed of, the deep dive into the very fabric of history. He studied the scans on the tablet Thorne had given him, his fingers tracing the faint impressions of the cuneiform script. He saw not just characters but a story, a world of ancient scribes, soldiers, and merchants. He pointed to a small, repeated character on one of the fragments. "This ligature," he said, his voice finding its familiar scholarly rhythm. "It's a form of the Lugal sign meaning king, but the variant here suggests a specific regional tribute. It's not in the standard Akkadian lexicon. It's an Eastern dialect, likely a variant from the Zagros Mountains." Thorne and Kincaid exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated awe. In minutes, Elara had seen what their teams of modern-day historians had missed for weeks. He wasn't just translating words, he was uncovering a lost regional dialect, an entire linguistic subset of a forgotten empire. As the meeting concluded and they left him to begin his work, Elara felt a profound sense of purpose. He was home. He had found his place in a world that valued his quiet, scholarly fire. But the phone on his desk, a sleek device he was still getting used to, buzzed with an incoming text, pulling him back to a different kind of reality. It was from Samuel, the community leader. The message was simple. The community is having a rally this weekend. We'd like you to be the keynote speaker. We want to celebrate you, Elara. We need you to be a voice for us. He read the message again, a bitter taste in his mouth. A voice for them? 4 years he had been a ghost, his silence taken for disloyalty. His solitary passion had been a source of scorn. Now, because a group of millionaires had validated his worth, they wanted him to stand on a stage and speak for them. The hypocrisy was a heavy, suffocating weight. He thought of the long, lonely nights, the countless hours spent poring over books while the sounds of community gatherings echoed from outside his window. He remembered the cold stares, the whispered insults, the feeling of being an outsider in his own home. He had never asked for their support then, and their sudden, enthusiastic embrace now felt less like a genuine apology and more like a calculated act of self-interest. They didn't see the scholar, they saw a symbol, a beacon of success they could now claim as their own. Elara leaned back in his chair, the city stretching out before him, a tapestry of 1,000 stories. He was no longer just a janitor. He was no longer just a scholar. He was a bridge between two vastly different worlds, one of immense wealth and opportunity, and the other of struggle and communal pride. He knew he had a choice to make. He could turn his back on them just as they had turned their back on him. He could immerse himself in his new world, leaving the echoes of his past behind. Or he could go back. Not as a symbol but as himself. He could use his new platform to talk not just about ancient kings, but about the unspoken history within his own community. He could show them that there was more than one way to fight, more than one way to be a voice. His strength was not in his loud proclamations, but in his deep, unwavering commitment to knowledge and truth. He felt the pull of the clay tablets on his desk, the quiet wisdom of a long-dead empire. He felt the pull of the message on his phone, the uncertain, hesitant voice of a living, breathing community. He knew that the hardest part of his journey wasn't getting into this new world, but learning how to go back to the old one, not as an outcast but as a leader. He had to figure out how to stand in both places at once. Elara's decision was not born of forgiveness, but of a deeper understanding. He sat in his new corner office, the city stretching out below him like an intricate, silent text, and considered Samuel's invitation. The hypocrisy of it all was a sharp, stinging presence in his mind. For years, his intellect had been a liability, a quiet, inward passion that marked him as an outsider. Now, in the afterglow of his newfound success, they wanted to claim him as their own. To use his newfound voice to speak for them. He could have simply deleted the message, immersed himself in the world of cuneiform and digital archives and never looked back. But that felt like another form of betrayal, a different kind of silence. His strength, he knew, was not in turning his back, but in confronting the past on his own terms. He would go to the rally. He would speak. But his speech would not be an endorsement of their newfound pride in him. It would be a sermon on a different kind of history, a lesson on the quiet strength they had overlooked for so long. He spent the next 2 days working on the Assyrian tablets and on his speech, the two tasks feeling strangely intertwined. The cuneiform script, with its intricate symbols and subtle nuances, was teaching him how to construct his words. Each cuneiform wedge was a point, each phrase a connected thought. He wanted his speech to be like a translation, a bridge between two worlds. The rally was held in the community center's parking lot, a space he had swept countless times. Now, a makeshift stage with a single microphone stood in the center, surrounded by folding chairs and a large, expectant crowd. He saw familiar faces, the man who ran the barbershop, the woman who owned the corner store, the young people who had once laughed at his quiet intensity. Samuel was there, his face a mix of nervous pride and genuine relief. When Elara arrived, there were murmurs and whispers. He could feel their anticipation, their collective hope that he would say what they wanted to hear. As he walked up to the stage, he did not rush. He took his time, his eyes meeting theirs, not with anger but with a calm, unwavering gaze. When he reached the podium, he did not immediately speak. He simply stood there, a man in a new, well-tailored suit, but with the same quiet dignity he had always possessed. The silence grew, thick and heavy with unspoken history. "I want to thank you for inviting me," he began, his voice clear and calm, amplified by the sound system. For many of you, I was a ghost. A man who swept the floors of your homes and your businesses. A man who moved through this community unseen. The words were a direct confrontation, a quiet acknowledgement of the past. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Samuel's face tightened. But I was never unseen to myself, Elara continued. For years, while you were building this community with your hands and your voices, I was building my own world. It was a world of lost languages, of forgotten histories, of kings and queens who ruled thousands of years ago. I spent my life in a library, reading about the ancient scribes of the Assyrian Empire. I learned that they wrote on clay tablets, a medium that was heavy and difficult. They didn't have the luxury of pen and paper, of instant communication. Their words, once inscribed, were permanent. A physical record that would outlast them, a stone sermon on the reality of their time. He paused, letting the image settle. I believe that every community is like a library of clay tablets. Every person here has a story, an experience, a history that is just as valuable as any decree from an ancient king. But for a long time, we were so busy looking for a single loud voice that we ignored the quiet ones. We saw my silence as a lack of passion. But my silence was never a betrayal. It was the sound of me listening. His words were a slow, steady tide, washing away the layers of pretense and ego. He wasn't lashing out, he was educating. He was translating the feelings they had all held into a language they could understand. He used a story from his work to make his point. Just 2 days ago, I was translating a fragment of an Assyrian tablet. It was a list of administrative records from a remote outpost. Nothing glorious. No epic battles or royal decrees. It was a list of grain, of livestock, of the taxes paid by a small, unremarkable village. But within that list I found a tiny, overlooked detail. A small, regional variant of the word for community. It was a word that showed me that even in the heart of a vast empire, they held on to their own unique identity. Their voices were not loud, but they were written in the clay and they were heard. He looked out at the crowd, his gaze full of profound sincerity. We were looking for a loud voice, but we already had thousands of them. In the quiet artist, in the diligent janitor, in the tireless caregiver. We all have a history to write, to read, and to protect. You did not abandon me, and I did not abandon you. We simply had to learn to read each other. A deep, emotional silence followed. This was not the speech they had expected. It was not a celebratory endorsement, but a humble, powerful lesson. The regret on their faces was no longer about their mistake. It was a deeper, more profound sadness for the time they had lost, for the people they had misunderstood. When he stepped down from the stage, they didn't rush him with loud applause. Instead, they approached him one by one, their words soft and heartfelt. A young boy, no older than 10, came up to him. "My grandma told me you're a king of old books," he said, his eyes wide with a mix of reverence and curiosity. Elara knelt down. "I am a reader of old books," he corrected gently. "And you are a writer of a new one. Don't ever let anyone tell you your words don't matter." He left the rally not as an ostracized outsider, but as a leader who had shown them a new way forward. The acceptance he had found in the world of millionaires was now mirrored in the faces of his own people. The two worlds were no longer separate. They were simply different chapters in the same sprawling, magnificent book of his life. Elara's life had settled into a new, exhilarating rhythm. By day he was a scholar, a director of cultural linguistics, the silent world of ancient scripts finally given a voice. By night he was a leader, a mentor, a quiet presence in a community that now saw him not as an outcast but as a bridge. The two worlds, once starkly separated, now flowed into each other like converging rivers. He would spend his mornings at the Thorn Industries skyscraper, working with Adrian Thorne and Vivian Kincaid to digitize the new Assyrian tablets, and his evenings back in his neighborhood, sharing stories of his work with a group of young people who now saw him as a symbol of what was possible. The office, once an intimidating symbol of a world that had ignored him, was now a sanctuary of intellectual discovery. He had found a rhythm with Thorne and Kincaid that was as fluid as it was productive. Thorne's analytical mind complemented Elara's deep knowledge, while Kincaid's grounded, historical perspective anchored their ambitious project. They were a triumvirate of past, present, and future, and their joint foundation, named the Elara Archive, was already gaining international recognition. The Assyrian tablets, however, were proving to be a challenge far greater than their initial state of fragmentation. As Elara delved deeper into the cuneiform script, he began to piece together a narrative that was not only unique but also deeply unsettling. The tablets, administrative records of a remote garrison in the Zagros Mountains, spoke of a significant military campaign and a series of victories that were widely celebrated in the historical texts of the time. However, as Elara meticulously translated the daily dispatches, he began to see a different story emerge. The commander of the garrison, a man named Ashur-buni-apli, was a pragmatic, detail-oriented leader. His records, written in a stark, unembellished hand, spoke of dwindling supplies, constant skirmishes with local tribes, and a gradual, painful withdrawal. The victories celebrated in the official records were, in fact, tactical retreats. The glorious conquest of the region was, in reality, a prolonged, costly failure. The administrative records, meant to be mundane and insignificant, revealed a history that had been deliberately and meticulously rewritten for the public. The official narrative was a lie. This discovery presented Elara with a profound ethical and professional dilemma. The Assyrian narrative of conquest was a cornerstone of 1,000 years of historical study. To reveal these tablets and their true story would not just be a discovery, it would be a demolition. It would challenge the careers of countless historians, including Dr. Finch, who had built their reputations on the very narrative Elara was now poised to disprove. He knew the world of academia could be a cruel and unforgiving place, especially to those who challenged its foundational truths. He had just found his footing in this world, and now he was faced with a choice that could send shockwaves through it. He sat in his office, the digital scans of the clay tablets glowing on his screen, and thought of his own community. He thought of the young people he mentored, the stories they told him of their own struggles, of a history that was often ignored or misrepresented by the wider world. He thought of Samuel and the rally, the powerful act of truth he had performed by simply telling his story. He realized that the same principle applied here. The truth of Ashur-buni-apli's retreat was just as important as the lie of his victory. The voices of the overlooked garrison, the small details of their daily struggles, mattered just as much as the grand, celebratory pronouncements of the empire. That evening he went to the community center. A small group of teenagers was gathered, working on a project to document the history of their neighborhood. They were using smartphones to interview their elders, creating a digital archive of their own stories. A young girl named Maya, who had once been among the most vocal critics of his silence, came up to him. "Elara," she said, her voice filled with a newfound respect. "We're running into a problem. Some of the older people, they don't want to talk about the hard times. They only want to talk about the good things. They say it's better for our image." Elara looked at her, a profound sadness in his heart, a deep resonance with his own current dilemma. He thought of the Assyrian kings who had erased their failures. He thought of his own community who had wanted to erase his silence. He realized that history, whether it was on a clay tablet or in a memory, was a fragile, complex thing. It was full of both glory and pain. To ignore one was to do a disservice to both. "Maya," he said gently, "tell them that the good times are only half the story. The truth, all of it, the good and the bad, is the only way we truly understand ourselves. A history without its struggles is not a history. It's a fairy tale." His words seemed to resonate with her, a silent understanding passing between them. He realized then that his professional life and his personal life were no longer separate. The wisdom he was gaining from ancient texts was the very same wisdom he needed to guide his community. His role was not to be a gatekeeper of knowledge, but a translator. He had to translate not just dead languages but living human truths. The final chapter of the Assyrian tablets was still to be written, and in a way so was the final chapter of his own life. The next step was not just about the truth of a forgotten king, but about the courage it would take to tell that truth, and the effect it would have on the world he was now trying to change. The week that followed was a crucible of decision. The discovery of the Assyrian tablets, revealing a meticulously constructed historical lie, weighed heavily on Elara. He spent his days in a quiet fury of intellectual work, cross-referencing, verifying, and meticulously cataloging the damning evidence. The fragments of clay and the subtle shifts in cuneiform weren't just academic curiosities anymore. They were a profound ethical challenge. The lie of a king, a lie that had been accepted for millennia, was about to be laid bare by a man who had once been a ghost in the halls of power. He finally called a meeting with Adrian Thorne and Vivian Kincaid. The atmosphere in his office was thick with unspoken tension. The city outside, a vibrant tapestry of commerce and life, seemed distant and insignificant. He projected the key documents onto a large screen, the high-resolution images of the cuneiform fragments glowing with silent, incontrovertible truth. He walked them through his findings with the same quiet authority he had used at the rally, laying out the evidence with the precision of a surgeon. He showed them the official records of a great victory, and then he showed them the garrison's daily dispatches, the true record of a painful, protracted retreat. Thorne was the first to speak, his voice low and concerned. "This is unprecedented, Elara. This isn't just a new discovery. This is a complete re-evaluation of a foundational historical narrative. The fallout will be immense. It will challenge every historian, every book, every established timeline." He looked at Elara with a pragmatic, almost pained expression. "Our foundation and your career have just launched. A discovery this controversial could sink us before we've even had a chance to get off the ground. Are you certain of this?" "The evidence is irrefutable, Adrian," Elara said, his voice unwavering. "The data doesn't lie. The king's scribes wrote for glory. The garrison's scribes wrote for survival." Vivian Kincaid, who had been silent throughout his presentation, finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it held the weight of 1,000 years of history. "Elara, as a historian, I have spent my life seeking the truth. Sometimes the truth is glorious and celebratory, and sometimes it is ugly and inconvenient. But it is always the foundation upon which we build our understanding of the world. To suppress this, to bury these tablets because of a fear of the fallout, that would be a greater crime than the king's deception itself. It would be a betrayal of every single person who has ever sought to understand their past." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a profound and silent approval. "This is a risk, but it is a necessary one. This is our purpose, Elara. This is why we created the Elara archive." The choice was made. With the full support of Vivian and the reluctant but respectful backing of Adrian Thorne, they prepared to publish the findings. The announcement was made in a press conference that Elara, for the first time, stood at the center of. He spoke not of the grandeur of his discovery, but of the quiet, enduring power of truth. He explained how a king's lie, so carefully constructed, had been undone by the simple, honest words of a long-dead soldier. The reaction was immediate and explosive. In the academic world, it was a cataclysm. Some historians, defensive and angry, accused Elara of shoddy scholarship and historical revisionism. Others, however, hailed him as a revolutionary, a scholar who had dared to challenge the established order and won. The Elara archive, instead of being destroyed by the controversy, was galvanized by it. It became a symbol of intellectual integrity, a place where the difficult truths of the past were not feared but embraced. The public reaction was even more profound. The story of the janitor-turned-scholar who had exposed a 3,000-year-old lie captured the world's imagination. He was no longer just a local hero, he was a global figure, a testament to the idea that expertise could be found in the most unexpected of places. Back in his community, the reaction was a quiet, deep well of pride. The story resonated with them on a visceral level. They saw a man who had not just found a new place in the world but had used that place to tell a difficult but necessary truth. They saw the lesson he had tried to teach them at the rally come to life. The young people he mentored saw a living example of what he had told them, that a history without its struggles is a fairy tale. They saw him on the news not with the superficial pride of an A-list celebrity, but with the heartfelt respect of a community who finally, truly understood him. Elara's life was now a beautiful, complex blend of the two worlds he had once navigated separately. He would spend his days uncovering ancient truths and his evenings helping his community write their own. He was no longer a ghost, no longer an outcast. He was a translator of two worlds, a man who had used the quiet power of his intellect to find his voice. His journey had not just been about a career change, it had been about a deeper, more profound transformation. He had learned that the most important truths, whether in an ancient tablet or in a human heart, are often the most difficult to tell, but they are also the most freeing. He was a janitor no more, but in a way he was still a cleaner, a man who had dedicated his life to sweeping away the dust of deception to reveal the shining truth that lay beneath. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.